Been playing with boards worth multiple hundreds of dollars for the last few vids, so let's come back to the budget end with the Tecware Phantom L RGB mechanical keyboard. Opening up the box, we have our USB Type-C cable, and I said I'd start calling this out, please stop folding cables. And then we get 4 extra key switches with a key switch puller, which tells us something, and a plastic ring keycap puller. And here's the keyboard itself. In the hands, it is a pretty light keyboard coming in at just under 600 grams, so about the same weight as the typical 60%. But the top is made from aluminium and there isn't much flex to it, and maybe you can tell that it's a bit slimmer than usual. And that's because the L means low profile, at least that's what I'm hoping and assuming. So the case itself is quite slimmer than a traditional mechanical keyboard. It's about 11mm thick, but then this bit towards the back that houses the flip-up feet and the USB Type-C port adds a bit more thickness as it's also on an angle, and at its thickest point it's about 16mm. Although it does have a low profile floating key design, so that doesn't particularly matter, meaning that the case doesn't cover the key switches. What really matters is the distance between the base and the top of the keycaps, which at its thickest point is around 30mm, and this is about 10mm shorter than most of the other mechs I have in my room, again at their thickest points. So obviously it has portability benefits, a bit easier to slip into the bag, but more importantly to me is the ergonomic benefits. The one thing about mechanical keyboards that I don't particularly love is the height of them. I mean, with a proper typing technique and posture, the height doesn't matter as much, but as I am lazy, and many of us are the same, especially when gaming, we rest our wrists on the table. And simply put, this reduces the angle and strain on your wrists. And to be honest, I really did enjoy this aspect of the keyboard. It's legitimately just more comfortable to use for me personally. And what makes these possible are these switches. As alluded before, this is an Outemu hot swap keyboard, so we can pull these out with the included key switch puller, and as always they are a pretty tight fit, and the sockets and plate are actually only compatible with these particular low profile switches. These are Outemu Snap Spring blue switches, which are slightly lower profile, which you can see comparing it to a standard key switch. It has a total travel of 3mm and a pre-travel of 1.2mm, so not too far off a standard key switch. Interestingly, you can use these on a standard PCB. The pin footprint is the same and it works just fine, and even better, it reduces the height of a keyboard by a considerable amount. And when you shorten a key switch, you gotta change the traditional MX internals. So the stem does not have a click jacket or tactile bump in the leg. Instead, the click and bump are created by, well, they described it well enough in the name, snap springs. Pretty cool to see something a little different. So let's see how they type. They remind me a lot of click bar switches from Kale, in particular their low profile chalk series, although this isn't as low as those. The click isn't as sharp as the click bar switches and therefore not as crisp in its sound, and the tactile bump is quite mild, but to be honest you might like that as it is a touch less harsh and a bit easier to take, relaxing even. They say it has a 60 gram actuation force, so a medium sort of weight, although they did feel a bit lighter to me. So it's a little bit of a different experience. It's not as crisp as Kale click bar switches, but not as rattly and mushy as say a Cherry MX Blue. So kind of an in-between switch, which I ended up having a pleasant time with. And since it's quite slim, it doesn't have a hollow feeling or anything. Since they are shorter, you may think it may suit gamers, as most gaming key switches advertised do the same sort of thing. Perhaps it does. I always thought it's a personal thing. Personally, I don't like repetitive actions on a clicky, but I do find it better with a shorter actuation distance. So a pretty solid typing experience overall, and it's always good to see something different. Also, even though it is a clicky keyboard, the stabilized keys had minimal rattle, which is always great to see. Obviously this has a big impact on the design of the keyboard, so the case aesthetic looks pretty good to me for a floating key design anyway. Nice and simple with the aluminium on top, which looks and feels nicely finished. Rounded corners and minimal branding makes for a clean look. It's just the keycaps really that kind of detract from that, but that's the personal opinion on these gamery looking fonts. You may like them, and that's cool. However, you can replace these keycaps if you want. You won't get much shorter than these middle caps, but DSA does sit pretty low, so you could do that if you really wanted to, but then you'd be covering up the RGB backlighting. You can download the software from the website and it looks surprisingly sleek. So we have 3 customizable profiles and it's super self-explanatory. We can select the key and change it to whatever. And that includes macros. So in this section we can create macros with delays and such, and then you can go back and assign them to a key. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a way to change the profiles on the board itself. You have to change via the software, so you can't really quickly access the other functions you assign to another profile, especially since you won't be changing too many keys on your default because you actually need to use them as intended. Then we have the lighting section, again self-explanatory. And finally the gaming mode section where you can disable some keys that may put you in a spot of bother. Overall, just a simple piece of software that works. I still would like to be able to switch profiles on board to quickly access other functions because there are profiles instead of layers. And let's take it apart. There's a couple of Phillips head screws under some keycaps and it comes apart super easy. This makes sense. There's some foam that goes between the PCB and the bottom of the case. As I mentioned before, it had a pretty dense feel, and paired with the naturally slim construction, it provides a nice base for typing. The aluminium plate is 1.5mm thick, which is the standard, but as it is the whole top piece, it makes for a light keyboard. And on the PCB, it looks pretty normal, but of course where the switch pins would be, there are the Outemu sockets, which the key switches go into. And it has the usual SMD RGB LEDs on there. The bottom piece is made from plastic, pretty basic, no ribbing on the bottom for reinforcement, but it's low profile anyway. And it looks like there's some room for a switch here, so perhaps there's a Bluetooth version hovering around under some other brand name. And that's the Tecware Phantom L. Always love coming back to the budget end of mechanical keyboards. This is $50, probably could get it for less, and I say it over and over again, budget mechs are the most accessible, and these Tecware boards are particularly popular in Southeast Asia. The main feature of the board is its low profile form factor. It's going to be light, it's not going to feel super premium or anything, but I actually enjoyed using something that's a bit slimmer than what I'm used to. And that's brought about by these low profile Snap Spring Outemu switches. An interesting one, bit of an in-betweener, not the clickiest, not the most tactile, and I would say my experience with these have been a bit laid back and less in your face sort of thing, which I ended up liking. And maybe that short distance will be comfortable for gaming, I don't know, it's up to you. And that's the thing, it's a unique little board that will suit someone out there.